Welcome to my channel, dear viewers. On this channel, I share stories based on real events. These stories are not fabricated by ChatGPT or any other AI network. While some real names may be changed, the events themselves are true. Today, we will explore how wounded pride can drive a person to commit horrifying acts. You'll learn how arrogance and an inability to face reality can lead to irreversible tragedies. Sometimes it's hard to fathom the consequences of a distorted view of the world. In this episode, I'll share 2 crime stories with you, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on each of them. Feel free to share your opinions in the comments, support the channel with a like, and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Our story begins on January 6, 2015, at 12:21 in the afternoon, on a road near Taejonsuk in Mungyeong County, North Gyeongsang Province. This place, typically a symbol of peace and tranquility, looked entirely different that day. Numerous police officers were stopping and searching every passing car. Suddenly, with sirens blaring, they sped off in pursuit of one vehicle. The chase lasted about a kilometer before the driver, seemingly resigned to the inevitable, began to slow down. Soon the driver, a 48-year-old man named Kang, stepped out of the car. He looked pitiful. He was wearing black sweatpants, soaked through with water. He offered no resistance and quietly surrendered to the police. However, marks on his wrists indicated a recent suicide attempt. The news of Kang's arrest shocked everyone who knew him. After all, Kang was a man many envied, a successful, wealthy figure, a true member of Korea's elite. He owned a house in Gangnam-gu, one of Seoul's most affluent districts, and held the position of executive director at a foreign company. In short, he was a man who had achieved everything. So why had he tried to flee and take his own life? Friends, all of these events unfolded within 12 hours. But let's first get to know Kang a little better. He studied business at Yonsei University, where he also completed his graduate studies. After that, he got a job at a well-known foreign company, working in finance. Thanks to his abilities, he quickly climbed the career ladder, and his income steadily increased. As I mentioned earlier, he eventually rose to the position of executive director. His career was skyrocketing. During his university years, he met his future wife, and together they had 2 beautiful daughters. Later, he was able to buy a 40-meter apartment in the prestigious Seoul area, a property that only the very wealthy in Korea could afford. His financial standing was equally solid. In short, it was a life anyone would envy. But as we know, misfortune often comes without warning. In 2009, Kang received a job offer with an annual salary of 90 million won at a major Eastern medicine clinic in Gangnam. He was to manage the clinic's finances. It was an excellent position with a high salary. For comparison, the average salary in 2009 was between 25 and 30 million won, so 90 million was a lot. But just 3 years later, in November 2012, the situation took a sharp turn. The clinic's chief physician was replaced, and the new chief forced Kang to resign. What can you do when the boss says leave? Kang left, but he remained confident. He believed that with his experience and qualifications, he would have no trouble finding another good job. However, reality turned out to be harsh. There were a few offers, but none of them satisfied Kang. After all, finding a job with a salary of 90 million won was no easy task. In the end, Kang decided to stop looking for work and focus on stock market investments. But he didn't want his daughters to see him in such a situation. They thought of their father as a successful man, and he didn't want to lose face. Apparently, it wounded his pride. So he told only his wife about his unemployment. His daughters, who were in middle and elementary school, were kept in the dark. Every morning, he pretended to go to work as usual. He spent his days in the offices of former colleagues and acquaintances, and in the evenings he returned home. But this couldn't last forever. After a couple of months, things got worse, and he rented a room in a goshwan, about 1.5 kilometers from home. It was a tiny room, measuring 2 pyong, about 6.6 square meters, without a window, for which he paid 320,000 won a month. He began going to work there. In the goshwan, Kang immersed himself completely in the world of stock trading. In reality, he wasn't an expert in this field, But he believed that since he understood finance, he could succeed if he studied the matter thoroughly. Some of his acquaintances had managed to do so, and there, in that cramped room, living on instant noodles, he devoted all his time to learning about investments, just to keep himself afloat. Despite this, he continued giving his family 4 million won a month to live on. Outwardly, everything seemed fine. His family continued to maintain the appearance of a wealthy life. His eldest daughter attended a yoga studio with an annual fee of 800,000 won, and he sometimes dined at expensive restaurants. But to keep investing, he needed money, and he decided to take a risk. He mortgaged his apartment and received a loan of 500 million won, of which he invested 400 million in stocks. However, things didn't go as he had expected. Within just a year, he lost 270 million won. Moreover, he had to pay interest on the loan, which amounted to about 1.5 million won a month. Combined with daily expenses, life was becoming increasingly difficult. The pressure was mounting. His wife, unaware of the full truth, began to worry about the fact that their house was mortgaged and demanded that they pay off the loan as soon as possible. Meanwhile, he was losing his ability to think clearly. His self-esteem had hit rock bottom, and the money he had invested in stocks continued to dwindle rapidly. His circle, friends and acquaintances, were succeeding in life, having graduated from Yonsei University, while he, as it seemed to him, was failing. He lived in a small room in a hostel and survived on instant noodles. On December 30th, 2014, he decided to end his life in the hostel and returned home. A week passed, and the new year, 2015, arrived. On January 5th that night, he offered his wife a glass of wine, her favorite drink. She gladly accepted, not knowing that he had spiked it with sleeping pills. After a while, she fell into a deep sleep. Their 2 daughters, aged 14 and 8, were also peacefully asleep in their rooms. Around 3 in the morning, he took out a notebook and began writing a suicide note. In it, he apologized to his wife. "I'm sorry, dear. May you find peace in heaven, and I will work off my sin in hell." He also wrote letters to other family members, asking them to use the remaining money in his accounts for the care of his and his wife's parents. After finishing, he reset his phone to factory settings and deleted all his social media accounts. Then, he took a scarf and went to his sleeping wife. He strangled her, and then entered the bedroom where his younger daughter was asleep and killed her in the same way. Around 3:30 in the morning, his older daughter stirred and woke up. She suspected nothing, and feeling pain in her stomach, turned to her father. "Dad, my stomach hurts." Kang, hiding any sign of alarm, gave his older daughter a pill, which was also a sleeping pill. He waited for her to fall into a deep sleep, and then strangled her, just as he had done with his wife and younger daughter. This happened around 5 in the morning. After finishing his crime, Kang left the house and got into his car, heading towards Cheongju, in the Daecheon-gu district. This was the very place where his family had gone on vacation at the end of the previous year. When he was on the verge of taking the final step, Kang unexpectedly called the emergency service at 119. In a calm voice, he told the operator, "I killed my wife and 2 daughters. I'm going to die too." He gave the address of his home and the code for the door lock, then hung up. Kang slowly made his way to the lake and began walking into the water. But since it was winter, his body wouldn't sink due to the thick winter clothing. He then tried to cut his wrists with a knife, but the fear of pain stopped him. Realizing that he couldn't bring himself to commit suicide, Kang decided to abandon everything and drove to another city, Mungyeong. Meanwhile, the police, having received his message, immediately went to their apartment in Seochodong. There, they found the 3 bodies. The officers began tracking his cell phone signal and discovered that he was in Cheongju. An intensified search led to his capture around noon. Kang, who had killed his family, was arrested. The autopsy revealed that all 3 victims had died from strangulation caused by pressure on the neck. A scarf was found around each of their necks, and traces of the sleeping drug zolpidem were found in their blood. However, the concentration in the younger daughter's blood was lower, suggesting that, as a small and weak child, she was killed without the need for the drug. During interrogations, Kang admitted that he had committed the crime because he felt that he and his family had no future due to financial problems. He feared that they would fall into the abyss of poverty. However, Further investigation uncovered oddities in his motivation. Despite the losses on the stock market and the debt from the loan, it was inaccurate to say that they were truly facing poverty. First, Kang owned an expensive apartment in Seoul, with an average value at the time of around 1.1 billion won, about 11 million US dollars. Even if he sold it and paid off the 500 million won loan, he would still have 600 million won left. In addition, his wife had 200 million won in reserve savings in her bank account. Both Kang's and his wife's parents were also financially well off and could have provided assistance if needed. Furthermore, the couple owned 2 expensive cars, so to claim that financial hardship was the cause of the crime seemed, to say the least, odd. Can you imagine this? I even had the thought that it was some kind of mockery of ordinary people who struggle every day just to survive, said one expert, expressing his thoughts on Kang's case. Psychologists believe that the true reason behind the crime committed by Kang was his deep-seated envy and sense of loss regarding his former status. You see, Kang had always been part of the middle class and above. More than that, he was never at the lower end of it. Perhaps that's why, when he lost his job, he didn't even consider lowering his standards. I won't work for a company like that. I'd rather trade stocks than work in a place like that, he thought. And despite his worsening financial situation, Kang continued driving an expensive car and didn't sell his luxury apartment in the prestigious Gangnam area. The thought of falling out of this social circle terrified him more than anything else. There's another theory. One lawyer pointed to Kang's excessive pride. After losing his job, he told no one about his situation except for his wife. Even to her, he concealed his failures in the stock market. His honor and pride were everything to him. During interrogation, he said, "Damn, I did all of this so I wouldn't fall in anyone's eyes. I've never asked for help. This damn prestige. That's why I killed my family." What nonsense, right? Other experts link his behavior to childhood trauma. Perhaps from an early age, Kang felt the need to live up to the high expectations of his parents. Any mistake or failure could have meant complete rejection of him as a person. We don't know for sure how his parents treated him when he was a child, but his father once said, "I gave him everything he needed." Maybe when he faced the first serious problem of his life, he took this desperate step. "I raised my son the wrong way," his father said, filled with bitterness and regret. This case differs from other family-related murders. It shows how quickly the psyche of someone who has lived as fragile elite glass can shatter when faced with unexpected difficulties. But the story doesn't end there. Any person with a conscience should feel deep remorse for killing their family. But do you know what Kang said during interrogation? "It's better this way than if I had died alone and left them to live." Can such a justification be valid? Who is he to decide for others, for his wife and daughters, who should live and who should die? In the early stages of the investigation, Kang showed no remorse for killing his family. This reveals how deeply he was trapped in the illusion that their lives and happiness depended solely on him. Some might interpret this as a sign of responsibility, but in reality, it was a gross distortion of reality. Kang genuinely believed that if he failed, it would be better for his family not to exist at all. How foolish and selfish it is to think that the death of his entire family was preferable to them continuing to live without him. The prosecution demanded the death penalty for Kang. But even here, something strange happened. The man who had tried to take his own life suddenly began to change his stance when faced with the threat of execution. He suddenly claimed that he was suffering from depression and mental illness, trying to get a lighter sentence. However, the court rejected his arguments. There were no medical records indicating that Kang had ever sought help from a psychiatrist. His crime was carefully planned, and his intelligence level, an IQ of 150 or higher, meant that he had the ability to think clearly. In other words, there was no basis for claiming that his mind was impaired at the time of the crime. In the end, the court sentenced Kang to life imprisonment, and his appeal was denied. As for his murdered wife Lee, before their marriage, she had worked in a prestigious hotel with a promising career ahead of her. After they got married, at her husband's request, she left her job and dedicated herself to the family. Lee was a frugal woman, so much so that she managed to save 200 million won. She was a caring mother, and her children, without attending expensive schools, excelled in their studies and had great relationships with friends and teachers. The court pointed out that Kang viewed his wife and daughters not as individuals, but as his property. He believed he alone had the right to decide their fates. Notably, he showed no sympathy toward his family during the investigation. As mentioned earlier, the murder of all 3 victims took him less than an hour. Afterward, he attempted to flee, and all of the events, from the murders to his capture, took place within 12 hours. Even more horrifying was the fact that the murder weapon was a scarf. He used it to strangle his victims, ensuring that they were truly dead. Even after their breathing stopped, he continued to tighten the scarf around their necks, just to make sure they were no longer alive. Kang, despite his determination to kill his family, was unable to follow through with his own suicide attempt. He became frightened and abandoned the idea at the last moment. This contradiction in his behavior was both astonishing and ironic. Of course, such a brutal and cold-blooded act raised the question of whether the death penalty was appropriate for him. However, due to the lack of a prior criminal record, and the fact that his wife's family, the relatives of Lee, pleaded for leniency, the court took these factors into account. As of 2024, Kang, now 57 years old, continues to serve his sentence in prison. The most horrifying aspect of this case is Kang's complete lack of basic respect for human life. As the head of the family, he could have cared for and supported his loved ones, but he had no right to control their lives. Yet until the very end, he thought only of himself, which is deeply repulsive. Kang couldn't part with his expensive apartment in a prestigious area, his high-paying job, his car, and most importantly, his fragile ego. But he so easily let go of the lives of his family. Claiming that his pride was wounded and that this justified killing his family? That's pure absurdity and cowardice. One cannot help but feel immense sorrow for his wife and 2 daughters, who became the victims of this senseless violence. Their lives were cruelly cut short by the very person who was supposed to protect them. Stay tuned as we dive into another story. Share your thoughts on the first story in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. On February 1st, 1995, a man entered the police station in the Hwangum-dong area of Daegu, with a grim expression on his face. He looked worried, shifting from foot to foot hesitantly before finally speaking. "Officer, my wife and children left home and I can't reach them." The man, 38-year-old Kim Kwang-neon, the head of his household, had come to report his family missing. He explained that he was deeply concerned because, in the harsh February cold, his family might be out in the streets, and he had no idea where they might have gone. The missing people included his 32-year-old wife, Kim, 12-year-old daughter, Hya Jong, 10-year-old daughter, Mi Hwa, and 8-year-old son, Seung-il. According to Kim Kwang-neon, he last saw them 5 days ago, on the morning of January 27th. That day, he had had an argument with his wife, after which, in anger, she took their 3 children and left the house. It wasn't the first time. Due to ongoing conflicts in their marriage and the strain of living with her mother-in-law, his wife had left the home multiple times before. However, this time their arguments had escalated far more than usual. Kim Kwang-neon had originally worked as a technician for a telephone company in the city of Mungyeong, in Gyeongsang Province. He had a stable job, but in 1994, deciding to become a professional investor, he suddenly quit and moved with his family to Daegu. He invested all of his savings, 30 million won, including his pension payout, into stocks. And, as you might guess, he lost everything, including the family savings. The family's financial situation grew dire, forcing his wife to take up a job in a restaurant to help support the household. But even with her income, their situation didn't improve. Soon, tensions arose between the couple. His wife demanded a divorce, no longer able to endure their circumstances, while Kim vehemently refused. The day before their disappearance, on January 26th, Kim Kwang-neon overheard his wife on the phone with someone, and what he heard left him shocked. "I don't need my husband, I only need you." Those were the words Kim Kwang-neon overheard during his wife's phone conversation. He immediately concluded that she was having an affair. Enraged, that very night he approached his wife and said, "You want a divorce? Fine, but pay me 50 million won as compensation." That amount was enormous in 1995, and Kim decided that if his wife was betraying him, he could at least take it out on her financially. His wife, without such a sum readily available, promised she could ask her parents for about 10 million won. She said she could give him the rest later and even wrote a promissory note to confirm her promise. After this, Kim Kwang-neon, somewhat calmed, went to sleep. However, when he awoke in the morning, he found that his wife and children had vanished. Moreover, the promissory note she had written the previous night was also missing. For several days, Kim tried to contact his wife, but it was all in vain. She did not get in touch. As time passed, he began to worry at least about his children. Were they healthy? Were they safe? After waiting several days, he finally decided to go to the police on February 1st, 5 days after they disappeared, and reported them missing. However, after hearing his story, the police concluded that it was more likely a typical case of running away after an argument rather than a genuine disappearance. After all, the children were with their mother, who served as their guardian. Moreover, the reasons for their disappearance seemed fairly clear. Another family conflict. The police registered the report as a case of leaving home voluntarily and advised Kim Kwang-neon to wait a few more days. But after some time, the situation changed. The wife, who was thought to be missing, returned home. This happened on February 6th, 6 days after the report was filed. However, she came back alone without the children. Alarmed, she immediately went to the police and asked, "Where are my children? Where are they?" The police were confused. According to the husband, she had taken them with her. The wife, in turn, explained in bewilderment, "I left alone. The children stayed at home." So what was really going on? In fact, on the night of January 26th, the couple did indeed have an argument, and it lasted until morning. Exhausted from the conflict, the wife decided to leave home and spend some time away from the family. She rented a room in a hotel and stayed there for about 10 days before returning home. However, when she returned, the children were not there. Only her husband was home. Alarmed, she immediately asked him, "Where are the children? Where are they?" But the husband responded irritably, "How would I know?" Not knowing what to do, the wife hurried to the police to find out what had happened to their children. The police were no less puzzled. According to the husband, it was the wife who had taken the children with her. Meanwhile, Kim Kwang-neon himself also came to the police station. When he saw his wife there, he began accusing her, raising his voice. "Where have you hidden the children?" Now both spouses were accusing each other of the children's disappearance. Clearly, one of them was lying, or something far more concerning had happened. The children might have disappeared while both parents were unaware. The police immediately reclassified the case as a child disappearance investigation and began an active search. The city of Daegu, where this tragedy occurred, had shaken the entire country just a few years earlier with another high-profile case, the disappearance of the Frog Boys. And now the police were especially sensitive to such cases. The first thought that came to the investigators' minds was that the children might have run away from home, tired of their parents' constant fighting, and simply vanished. However, this time it wasn't just one child, it was 3. The police began searching the surrounding area, schools, and the entire neighborhood, distributing over 20,000 leaflets with photos of the children. However, no leads emerged. The police also reached out to all child shelters and child protection centers in the Daegu and Gyeongbuk areas, but no trace of the children was found. The investigation then decided to focus on the father, Kim Kwang-neon, since he had a troubling precedent. A year earlier, after yet another fight with his wife, he had hidden the children with relatives for an entire month to spite her. Perhaps he had decided to pull a similar trick again and filed a false report with the police. During the investigation, the police began questioning all of the family's friends and relatives, but unfortunately, this did not yield any results. The whereabouts of the children remained unknown. Then, finally, a lead emerged, a witness. One of the family's neighbors stated that on January 27th, the day after the argument, he saw the 3 children playing in front of the house. According to the husband, Kim Kwang-neon, the children were supposed to have left with their mother before dawn on January 27th. However, the witness claimed to have seen them that same afternoon, raising serious doubts about the truthfulness of the husband's story. The police believed that false testimony from eyewitnesses was unlikely, which meant that most likely, Kim himself was lying. He was summoned to take a lie detector test, but he avoided appearing. Only after several attempts did he take the test, but the results were inconclusive and provided no definitive conclusions. Some sources reported that the test indicated positive reactions, which could suggest lying, but the police could not use this as grounds to accuse him of a crime. Despite this, Kim Kwang-neon continued to insist that his wife had taken the children with her the day she left the house. Because of this, the police began considering his wife as a suspect and began her interrogation. During her testimony, the wife revealed shocking details. Throughout their marriage, she had run away from home 3 times and indeed had an extramarital affair, which was, of course, a serious transgression. However, each time she left, Kim used it as an opportunity to demand money from her parents. In total, he extorted about 5.2 million won from them. The wife's parents, eager to preserve their daughter's reputation in a patriarchal society, felt compelled to pay to avoid any scandal. The wife also claimed that she ran away to escape the constant abuse from her husband. On the day of her most recent departure, she said that Kim, fearing she would take the children, slept in front of the children's room door to prevent them from leaving with her. That's why she left alone, trying not to wake him. The police began searching Kim Kwang-neon's home and car, suspecting that he might have done something terrible, as the children had been missing for over 10 days. Their suspicions were confirmed. Traces of blood were found in the car trunk and in the bathroom. These findings, along with the neighbor's testimony about seeing the children on January 27th, strengthened the police's suspicions, and they began to put pressure on Kim. Realizing that conventional methods weren't working, the investigative team decided to change their approach. They brought in a softer-spoken investigator to have a more empathetic conversation with him. The investigator began with words of sympathy. "It must be hard for you that the children are missing, but maybe you've dreamed of them?" This question was part of a police tactic aimed at emotionally nudging the suspect toward a confession. "Mr. Kim Kwang-neon, now is the time to tell the truth and let our children find peace." These words had the desired effect. Kim's eyes started to redden, and soon he confessed to killing his 3 children. On January 29th, 2 days after his wife left home, the children were still alive. That day, Kim received a call from his wife, who told him that she would never return home. It was the period just before the Lunar New Year, and Kim was determined to bring her back at any cost. He came up with a lie to put pressure on her. "Listen, the children aren't home. You took them, right?" But his wife had encountered such tricks before and didn't believe him. Realizing that his plan had failed, Kim became even more enraged. A desire for revenge grew within him, and he made a horrific decision: to kill his own children. On January 30th, around 1 p.m., Kim told the children, "Let's go find Mom." The children, happy and hopeful, got into the car, thinking their father was taking them for an outing. However, Kim had a knife with a 20-centimeter blade in his hand. First, they drove to the wife's parents' house. Kim thought she might be hiding there, but when they arrived, she wasn't there. Kim Kwang-neon was disappointed that his wife wasn't at her parents' place. He then turned to his children and suggested, "Kids, how about we go gather some wild plants?" Unsuspecting, the children happily agreed. On the way, Kim stopped by a hardware store and bought a shovel. After that, he headed to Baekyeongdong Cemetery, located on the outskirts of Gyeongsang. Upon arriving at the site, Kim parked the car and told the children to play nearby while he began digging a grave. After some time, he called each of his children over, starting with the eldest, 12-year-old Taejonsuk. She was the first to approach her father, and when he began tying her hands with shoelaces, she realized something was wrong and began pleading, "Daddy, Daddy, please don't kill me." But Kim, who had lost all humanity, strangled her and then finished her off with a knife to ensure she was dead. He then repeated the same horrific act with his 10-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son. All 3 were buried in a grave approximately 1.5 meters deep. What kind of person could do such a thing? Moreover, after murdering his own children, Kim returned home calmly and watched videos as if nothing had happened. It was behavior not of a human, but something monstrous. Later, attempting to justify himself, he said, "The children were innocent, it's my fault, But it all happened because of my wife, because of her. He kept blaming his wife, claiming her actions drove him over the edge, especially after he had lost all the money in the stock market and was extremely frustrated. When asked why he killed the children, Kim replied, "When I looked at them, I remembered my wife, and I was filled with a rage I couldn't contain." The day after his confession, the police found the bodies of the children at Baekyeongdong Cemetery, buried under a layer of dirt and leaves. They were all covered in blood, and their bodies had already frozen in the winter cold. The children's bodies were found in a terrible condition. Their frozen, lifeless forms shocked everyone who was present at the crime scene. Immediately after, the trial of Kim Kwang-yeon, blinded by a thirst for revenge and who had killed his 3 children, began. He was sentenced to death and was imprisoned. However, in 1999, due to an amnesty for Korea's Liberation Day, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and he remains in prison to this day. The final blow for many was the entry found in the diary of his eldest daughter, Hae-jong. She wrote, "Mom is back. The house will be noisy again." It was evidence of how deeply the children suffered from their parents' constant arguments, the pain and anxiety they endured. The selfishness of their parents, their inability to see their children as individuals rather than property, led to this tragedy. This story makes us reflect on the fate of innocent children who suffer because of their parents. How long will I have to tell such stories? This case truly saddened everyone.